So welcome everyone to this exclusive webinar hosted by HSBC India along with EY India as knowledge partners. The webinar throws light on one of the most crucial decisions for your business and your wealth, which is succession planning. It's a very complex but a very essential process that decides the longevity of your business and wealth. So very, very important for that. It's easy to earn it. I think it's very difficult to keep it and maintain it and grow it. Recent surveys indicate that most individuals do not plan their succession or even things like their wills well in advance. So through this webinar, we want to cover the importance of succession planning, inheritance tax, and I'm sure all of you heard a lot about it just as budgets are about to come in, and of course, trust structures in India. So before we jump into this discussion, let me introduce myself. My name is Surabhi Marwah. I'm a partner with EY, a tax partner. I co-lead private tax within EY, and I'm your moderator for this session. In my day job, I work with HNIs, promoters, on a lot of issues regarding structuring, succession planning, personal tax affairs. So that's my role for today. I'm very, very excited to have with us two experts. One, my fellow colleague partner from EY, Mr. K.T. Chandy. Chandy also co-leads private tax in India. He's a very senior partner with the firm, also leads our Bangalore and Kerala tax practice. He will be talking a lot about, the need for succession planning, how it works in India, a little practical experience, structures, and he will be answering a lot of the questions that you have on this. I'm also joined by Nikhil Singhal. Nikhil is the head of Premier Top Tier Business with HSBC India. Now, what is top tier? I must tell you this. The top tier business looks at complete banking, investments, and asset financing solutions for ultra high net worth clients. We're going to have a presentation for you, which Chandy will take some panel questions and answers where I'm going to be putting Chandy and Nikhil on the spot. But we have about 15 minutes for you, ladies and gentlemen, for your questions. So as we go along, please feel free to post in your questions. And we promise to take as many as we can towards the last 15 minutes. If we can't get to a few, and I hope you have a lot of them, then we will get back to you personally one-on-one as well. So please feel free to chime in, put in your questions and interact with us through this channel. So let me start with you, Nikhil. Thank you very much first for having us join HSBC for this webinar. We are very pleased to be a part of this. A question that's very pertinent, like maybe to set the context and, to talk about why we're doing this today. Why was there really a need for HSBC and EY to get together to hold this joint session on this particular topic? Why this topic and why together? What's the relevance of it all? Over to you, Nikhil.
Great. Thank you, Surabhi, for your very kind introduction, I must say. I can actually take the opportunity on behalf of my colleagues at HSBC to extend a very warm welcome to our esteemed participants and especially my co-panelists, Surabhi and Chandy. I hope, and I'll borrow a line from what you said just now, I hope we can make the next 60 minutes count for all the participants and maybe get them thinking about, something as complex as intergenerational transfer of legacy. This is actually a very, very interesting topic. It's a topic of very high levels of interest. But you know what, surprisingly, it's also the most kicked around topic. When I say kicked around, it's a topic which actually gets deferred the most. Part of the reason is because it also asks a lot of awkward questions. And who does it ask the awkward questions to? It asks the questions to the key decision maker itself. It is about discussing mortality. It is about discussing incapacity of the current decision maker, which is why, and also if I have to borrow a little bit of a context, in India, the current duty structure does not force you to take that decision instantly, which is why it's a bit of a topic which gets a bit on the background. I guess things are changing now. Things are changing at a very fast pace. Part of the reason is because of the huge awareness which people now have because of their travel overseas, because a lot of their JVs that they're forming across the globe, this has made them thinking. This has made them thinking that, okay, there are evolving structures globally and they want to look at replicating some of the best practices. Maybe the complexity of of the transactions also increase. So that has also put them under a bit of a push to sort of look at alternate structures. So there is a lot of awareness which is coming through. It has probably made our job a little easier because there is a fair bit of acceptance to look at topics, complex topics such as this, a little early on than earlier. Uh, why this session particularly? I thought this session really intends to challenge a lot of existing notions, maybe give a little bit of a perspective on the overall, context of succession planning. But it's not just monetary; it has various other connotations. But before I get on to that, so it's also important for us to realize that this session is only intended to give you an overview of the various components involved. It may not be construed as a true advisory in that sense, because everybody's circumstances are far more individualistic and they warrant specialized solutions. But I think it's important to get the overall context of what is it we're trying to say and how is it relevant. And if I have to delve deeper into this, succession planning becomes all the more relevant for family owned enterprises and ultra high net worth because one, the stakes are fairly large, and two, uh, in fact, I was very impressed to see these numbers. I mean, some of them actually rattled me. 80% of India's GDP is actually controlled by family owned enterprises. And after the agri based economy, these enterprises are also the largest employment providers. So their success and failure impacts all of us collectively. And so it's very important thus to understand this topic in its entirety. There are multiple connotations I'd like to brief, from a context setting perspective on succession planning. The way we understand succession planning is maybe succession planning from a going concern perspective, which is how do you keep the firm going as a ongoing concern after the current generation of the promoter ceases to be the key decision maker, which is intergenerational. Now, again, important data here, not more than 12% of your family owned businesses last out the second generation. And the very unfortunate bit is not more than 3% of them last out the third generation, which essentially means there is a lot of background work required. Does it also mean that can the passion and the competency of the founding promoter be replicated by the next generation of founders? And that's very important. Now, it doesn't mean that the next generation is incompetent. It just means that maybe their interest levels are on a different topic, a different area of interest, which again means that do I, as a promoter or the founding promoter, have to look at alternate means, which is to segregate the ownership structure to the management structure. So that's my bit around succession planning as a going concern. The other bits to look at is maybe succession planning from a legacy preservation perspective. Within legacy preservation, how do you look at the couple of major factors? How do you cater to business contingencies? The intent of the promoters could be good, but there are circumstances which are, like we say, outside the domain of our control, which could be force majeure events, etc. They can put the businesses in jeopardy. But how do you have to preserve the family sustenance? The idea here could be to segregate or demarcate your personal pool of assets to the growth capital being put in the business. Very important for us to realize that, and by the way, we see this every number of times where clients say that my business can fetch me 25% return. Why do I have to go to alternate means and earn subpar returns? Very well taken. But there has to be a differentiation between the growth capital being deployed in your own business versus a certain pool of assets being created to preserve and protect from contingencies. The other bit connected to the legacy preservation is also about preserving against conflicts. So we're talking about second generation, third generation of businesses, third generation of people coming into the family-owned enterprises. It does lead to cross holdings. It does lead to conflicts of interest kind of scenarios. And you want to de-risk your business from these events. And a lot of these family conflicts are, by the way, not driven often by rationale, but by strong egos, which do not find their way through an easy resolution. So the whole point is that's the bit about succession planning that you want to do to protect your legacy. And the last but not the least is the succession planning aspect from a monetary perspective. Now, this is a very important context, and that's one of the reasons legacy of succession planning has gone to the background. India abolished estate duty in 1985.
Right.
I'm not saying that we're at the cusp of restarting it. I have no idea about it, but last 4, 5 budgets have made all kinds of noises. And like you actually rightly pointed out, Jan becomes very exciting on this topic. And of course, post that, we've seen a cessation of talk on this. But the whole idea is you may still want to keep a context that today India is a it's not a developed market, but it's a large developing market, which is challenging the developed markets. Now, if I have to look at the so-called peer group in the large economies, I have a US, a UK, a Germany, a Brazil, a Netherlands, a Japan, and a Germany, which all have estate duties in the form, which all have inheritance taxes either in the form of IHT or in the form of estate duties.
Right.
And they, by the way, range from 7.5% to 55%. Often these have a taper relief, which means if you plan for them in advance, you possibly have a substantial runway to save a lot of money, which is why these are very, very prevalent topics in the West. These are topics which are possibly occupying the highest mind share for anybody who hits the 50th birthday. So these are very relevant topics, and these are aspects which can find our way anytime in India if they have to. But even otherwise, like I said, succession planning is not just about saving on duties, it's also about continuing and preserving the legacy for the foreseeable future, at least for the next foreseeable generations. So, given that it's only India and Russia, which are the two countries outside the large economies which do not have IHTs right now, it's an area you may want to be aware of. And that's part of the reason we thought we should have a session like this, which at least gets you thinking on these lines. So thank you, Surabhi. With this, I just wanted to do a brief context setting and why HSBC and EY got together. Why EY is very, very simple. I think that's the easiest part of your question. We wanted to benefit from your expertise, the kind of global footprint you all have, and the knowledge dealing with various sectors. I think it just says it all. And we are happy to borrow about some time of your, I mean, just half an hour from you, and happy to present that perspective, to be honest.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. You know, when you were speaking, the passion in your voice and the knowledge was coming out. So I think you've set the perfect backdrop for Chandy. Just one thing before I hand over to Chandy for the presentation. You talked about turning 50. The Gen Y will say we make our money at 35, 50, we retire. So the 50, so that's the only thing I want to say. So
Absolutely.
Chandy, I'm going to ask you to take over and share with us through some of these slides the importance and specifically about why people have this whole misconception that succession planning is only inheritance tax and the importance of timing. But before that, can I request the back end team to project the slides, please?
Thank you, Surabhi. Thank you, Nikhil, and welcome to all the participants. And Nikhil has really made my job easier. He has whetted your appetite on what is going to come. A lot of it is already stated, but restating the point never goes waste in family business succession and inheritance planning. So as you can see from this slide, the proportion of family businesses in India compared to the rest of Asia, the output that the family businesses bring to our GDP, or the percentage of GDP that is controlled by the family businesses, and the employment generation that these businesses create, or the employment that these businesses create, and the thought process of a lot of our entrepreneurs that on how this business is created and why they are running it with such intensity and with such focus. The thought process is that they want to hand over the best possible business to the next generation, and they would like to see the next generation sort of perpetuate the philosophy and the reasoning or the reason for which businesses were set up. So that's really the backdrop. And with this backdrop, if you go to the next slide, again, a point that Nikhil referenced on why do people, what happens and why do people defer succession planning as much as they can? Because this is an area where awkward questions are asked, and questions around, um, who will lead the business, how will it move between brothers, between sisters and brothers, between cousins, what is the stake that you would like to give working members of the family, non-working members, how would you induct family members into the business, at what level would they be inducted, would you pass on to a board of directors who are executive and non-family, and so on and so forth. So that is one part of it. The second part of it is, and there are some points here on why family businesses don't always make it to the third generation, and so on and so forth. But this is not only because there's no succession planning, but succession planning being there sort of um, uh, helps perpetuate the legacy. And why is it? Because when you get into a succession planning exercise, you really have to question everything. You have to start from base zero. Is this a business? And I have worked with quite a few families who start asking the question on, this business was set up by my father, does it continue to be relevant in the next generation? And we all know how fast technology has changed, how it has changed business models, how thought processes, new products have come in. So therefore, when you get into succession planning, you are forced to think about, is this business relevant for the next generation? Am I saddling the next generation with a business that cannot grow? And when you get into that conversation, when the patriarch is in his prime, he's able to then guide the next generation, guide his or steer his business into newer areas. Get out of areas that may not be the most relevant 50 years from today. Therefore, succession planning not only helps you avoid family conflicts, which we are all seeing, we have all heard, we have all read about, but it also gives an opportunity for the family members to sit down and say, what are we doing? Will we continue to be successful if these particular fact pattern present themselves? For example, this pandemic is a classic example, right? Many people would have sat down and said, okay, I am overweight on certain sectors. I'm only in the real estate space. Um, is that a problem? If something like the pandemic comes about, if work from home comes about, if work from rural areas comes about, and I'm only in a particular sector, it doesn't bode well for the continuing health of the sector. So things like that are also tackled through an exercise of succession planning. And again, the quote here that is provided is very relevant, right? That what you're doing for a business is guarding it, watching it, nurturing it for the next generation. And all of these adjectives used here is also to constantly evaluate on whether what you're passing to the next generation will sort of last the test of the next few years. What are some of the, as you look at this, what we have bucketed into 4 dimensions. So 4 dimensions that are relevant and that cross the minds of patriarchs as they sit down to think about succession planning. And what are these 4 dimensions, if we are even able to put it in 4 dimensions? The first is to harmonize family participation. And what do we mean by that? Yes, we have some bullets down, but let me overall, provide an outline of what this is. Here, as families sit down for business, they start thinking about uh, business assets and non-business assets. So we are all used to entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are most used to leveraging themselves, their assets to grow, to further grow, etc. But at some point, particularly when you think of succession planning and the current environment, you would want to think, should I not keep something aside for a rainy day? Is it not prudent that I keep 10% of my asset, 20% of my assets separate, completely separate from the business assets? And if there are worst case scenarios that play out and the business assets are diminished, my family can still survive on the assets that have been kept out. So that is one key area that crosses a lot of promoters and entrepreneurs' minds. The next is, as families get into second generation, third generation, you start thinking about how does one ensure that the standard of living is maintained and there are sufficient cash flows for all members of the family. And therefore, if everything is sitting in a company, how do you ensure and how do you give guidance on? And if there are, if for example there are five entities that the family owns, and some are making money, some are not making money, how do you ensure? And there are different family members running it. How do you ensure, one, that you pool the cash, and two, that the whole family believes that all four, they're working on it together, and that they're sharing in each other's ups and downs. And again, you're able to then say, family members, this is the quantum of cash that we generate, and this is the percentage that we would be happy taking out of the business, and this is the percentage we want to keep in the business, and this is the percentage that we want to invest in newer businesses. This also helps at a later stage to eliminate or to minimize conflicts to a large extent. And that is, we have some thoughts on employment, or rather family charter, family family wills, so on and so forth. But a well-planned succession document also really preempts conflict. And when you all sit down together as a family, you may even decide, let's not pool these four companies that I gave an example of. Let's separate two wings of the family, and let's continue. Let's have, there are multiple arrangements that can be put in place. There are also points about active versus inactive members, particularly when it's in the second, third generation. What happens of people working, not working? How should they be differentially compensated? Should they be differentially compensated? People who are working in the business should not get the sense that we are working for the others while we are not differentially compensated, and so on and so forth. There are also forced heirship rules. So if you don't put everything together under a trust structure, the assets pass through law and in a particular proportion that you may not want necessarily for business. As you go down this process, you also put in place a structure that makes sense for the family, and each family, you would customize and craft a different structure. You may think of eliminating cross-holding. There may be branches of the family that say, we want this asset and we'll move out. There can be exchange of assets between family members. You can try and avoid cash trap with multiple layers of companies. There may be corporate action that one needs to take to facilitate this. And particularly groups that are 20, 30, 50 years old, you would see multiple companies, multiple cross-holding, so on and so forth. Now, the next is also on harmonization, and or rather getting the family to act together. So you can imagine a structure where you don't have pooled ownership. The ownership can get highly fragmented, and once it's highly fragmented, the potency of the group as a whole, you get broken up. You're not able to borrow. If it's a listed company, shares get sold without you having control. You may lose control of your company, so on and so forth. The next, and here in all of this, and I'll talk about it in more detail when you get into the trust structure. It's, a trust is a living document till a particular point in time, and I won't get into a revocable versus irrevocable trust, etc. But you can keep changing it till a point in time. The last is, once you get down this aspect, you can provide clarity on how this business needs to be done, needs to be undertaken. What is the vision of the family, and get everyone to buy into the family strategy and the vision, and also get collaborative answers on what is the expertise required. It's not only age, it's not only seniority, it's expertise, it's outside expertise, education, so on and so forth. And most importantly, in today's world, this exercise, as I was stating, also gives the family the space and the time and the opportunity to reflect on what they should be doing, what they should not be doing, and whether they can do things better. We spoke about succession planning, and succession planning can be an opportunity to also think about estate duty, inheritance tax, as we would call it. Now, and I won't dwell on this too much. As Nikhil said, inheritance tax, most developed countries, capitalistic countries, have this, have estate duty. The tax ranges up to 50-55%. India had it till 1985. When it was abolished, the comment made while abolishing the law was that it costs more to monitor this than the collections we get out of this. It has been blamed for black money creation in part. So there were many reasons why inheritance tax, the law was abolished. But today, given where we are in a fiscal situation, given the advantages of having this law, not only from tax collection, but from increasingly from multiple governments thinking of, with a social perspective, and also the ability to track, assets that individuals have with all the technology. Estate duty it has been on the anvil. Again, people constantly talk of it. It's a big decision, but in India, one would think it would be very difficult to say that this law will never come in. Yeah. So therefore, you go to the answer, you go to the point of, or you go to the side of, it's not that it will never come in, it's only about when it will come in. So I think that's the mood currently in India. And how does succession and estate duty work together? And what is estate duty? When an asset moves down generations on death. So on death, on demise, if an individual owns asset and it goes to the next generation, on the passing from one to the other, tax needs to be paid. There are exemptions, there are minimum qualifying amounts, etc. Under the old law, and again, without getting into technicalities, if one created an irrevocable trust, so the settler, the owner of the asset, created an irrevocable trust and moved assets into that trust irrevocably, at the point of this person's demise, he did not own the asset, and therefore assets once in a trust could be protected against inheritance tax. Now, when the law comes about, whether there will be anti-abuse provisions, whether there will be provisions that even if it was irrevocably transferred, they could levy some form of inheritance tax is not known, but it is better than not having any planning at all. So, in the international scenario, if you look at US, UK, the Netherlands, Brazil, etc., all of them have inheritance tax. Now, if we go to the next stage,
Chandy, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So I can see a lot of questions coming in. So I'm going to request you to maybe go through the slides in the next 2-3 minutes so that all of your fans I can repeat their questions for you for the next couple of minutes then.
Sure, Surabhi. So the next slide is, as you get into this, the next few slides, as you get into this is about succession planning. Why would you do succession planning, and how is succession planning different from inheritance tax? And as you merge these two, one would need to look at the entities that you own, the assets that you own. And this is the slide here shows all the regulations that one has to review, starting from the tax law, to SEBI if you are listed, to competition regulations given the size, company law, stamp duty, NBFC regulations, succession laws, personal laws, so on and so forth. So with this, if you go to the next slide, this is fairly simple. What are the succession laws? Intestate, i.e. without a will, there are different laws that govern on a religious basis. If you make a will, what happens is covered here. And what is important here is, there are heirship rules in that if wealth moves in particular, if you don't make a will, wealth moves to next generation in particular ratios, which may not necessarily be the answer that the owner of the property wants. If you go to the next slide. Now, in succession planning, one would ask what is required. One is the philosophy of the group, the thought process of the patriarch, and I have seen in my multiple interactions that when the main decision maker, the person who set it up or the person who really grew it, is around, it's easy to decide on various matters that concern the family. When it gets into first cousins, second cousins, it's much more difficult for each to agree. As Nikhil said, ego gets into play. Um, but the structures that are used, there will be a trust. A trust can equally hold a holding company, partnership firm, so on and so forth. So there are multiple structures that could come in. And what are the documents that we would need? On the right hand side, the family constitution, shareholders agreement, if you're throwing it all under the trust, partnership deed, trust deed, the wishes of the settler, a will for balance assets, what are the operating protocols, how often must we meet, how often must we review, how often must we change, the people in charge, should they retire at 60, should it not be 60, when does next generation come in? So a lot of detail, a lot of trust, and really the foundation of the family fabric is tested and strengthened sometimes, and even weakened, I have seen at times, by this process. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, this is a quote that needs no explaining.
So Chandy, I think the great presentation, and I've got a lot of questions for you and a lot coming in as well. But I think a couple of takeaways, if I was, if I didn't know this subject, is one which I think both you and Nikhil alluded to. It's very complex. It's case specific, and it's not just about parking your wealth in a trust or deciding on what should go into a will versus what should go into a trust. It depends upon your type of assets, your generation, sometimes even the residential status and citizenship of your beneficiaries. I mean, if one of them is a US citizen, etc., it just complicates it. A goes to Z in terms of complication. So all of those things have to be taken into account. Another thing is, when I started working on these aspects a couple of years ago, I realized that a lot of my clients, very, very, high core and high net worth professionals, didn't have anything as basic as a will. And I remember talking to one of them, and he said, I never made a will because I assumed everything will go to my wife and daughters. And then I explained the whole, Indian Succession Act and Hindu Succession Act, but that myth stays, and it's very surprising, which is why I am going to ask you that question in a bit, Chandy, about the will. And a little personal one, when I came back a few years back and I told my husband, you need to make a will, I think my mother-in-law's first reaction was, are you leaving him? And I said, no, it's very important to make it for XYZ reasons. And it's not because I don't like you, but it's so much easier and simpler if you just make that one document. It doesn't even have to be, very long and, unveiling, but that's just the kind of reactions we get to some of these things. So that was on a lighter note. But thanks, Chandy. So I will be coming back to you in just about a moment because we have a lot of questions for the two of you. Nikhil, I'm going to come back to you. You spoke about stages of succession planning, reasons, wealth creation, personal guarantees, etc. What do you think is the ideal stage for a person who's a businessman or an owner to think about succession planning? What's that? Don't say 50 again. You will. That's not allowed anymore. So, what do you think is the ideal stage?
Right. So first of all, Chandy, I think it was a great presentation, very complex. It just made me realize that thank God I'm not a tax consultant. And it's a very complex topic, and my job as a banker is relatively much simpler. But great, I think the overview that you gave was really, really very good. Coming to Surabhi, your question, you see, unfortunately, there is no fixed timeline to it. And like you said, this is a very personal decision. This will vary from client to client. For everybody, the circumstances are going to be different. The nature of ownership structure and the degree of complexity, people are normally familiar with. They're also aware in terms of what are the potential blow-ups and issues that can come up. Uh, like I'd said earlier, and if I take a cue from Chandy's presentation, succession planning is not just about paying a certain duty. It is also about continuing the business, keeping it evergreen. The legacy has to continue, even though the business model can evolve with changing times. I think it's the franchise which has to continue. And how do you keep that going? I think you must play to the moral authority of the patriarch, which means as long as he has a good working active life there for a foreseeable 10 years or unless there's some contingency, I think the event can be managed far better. Like I said, his authority is such that he can actually take some tough decisions. He can actually facilitate a segregation of duties in a complex family structure. With that, typically the overlaps are a lot lesser. It also helps to actually avoid cross holdings, etc. So some of these become tedious in terms of execution, and so they tend to get deferred. But I think that's where you have to step back in your prime, take some time out for these tough decisions and act on that. When you have a runway of another 10, 15 years of active life, when I say active life, I mean active work life, and when your authority is really at your peak, I think that's the time you can possibly start making some of those decisions. Implementation, etc., can take a little longer. That's all okay. But I think when you do these over a period of time, the degree of acceptance is also a lot higher. So that's on the business related stuff. On the financial bit, like I said, if these discussions are to happen overseas, people act really fast because there's a financial incentive around the taper relief. But if I have to look at this in India, it's a gray area right now. I think the nuance that Chandy provided around, I'll take a cue from what Chandy said, the nuance around the reason why the estate duty was actually discontinued was the collection figures was, I think, about 2,000, 2,500 crores, or that figure around then, which did not maybe add up to a significant number, and the collection cost was a lot higher. But given the way the technology has all pervaded now, some of these things become a lot easier from the management perspective. Of course, the angle around fiscal deficit bit that Chandy provided. So yes, if one has to do it, it's not that difficult a task in today's time and age. Which is why it may be prudent for people to think and act basis their circumstances. So the situations will vary from people to people, but I guess there is no fixed time frame. It's never too late, but it's still going to be a good start whenever you're able to do that.
I think bang on, Nikhil. We know when we get the second and third generation who are very keen to do this come to us and start talking. After the first couple of conversations, I think the first thing we tell them is the patriarch involved? Do you have his or her agreement? Because otherwise we're going to sit here and spend months and hours with you, and at the end of it, nothing's going to come on. And there have been cases and assignments which have fallen through because all the planning by the second, third, and fourth generation has gone haywire because someone at the top wasn't agreeable or didn't think it was the right time. So I think bang on, and everybody here should take cognizance of that. Chandy, question for you, and you alluded to trust structures, and a lot of people are interested because I think the myth was you make a trust and that's it. Your succession planning is done, which is not the case. It might just be a start, but there's so much more to it. I'm going to also present a slide which you can probably talk through or just answer this question. We've seen a lot of families opt for trust structures. What is the benefit and how does it help? Over to you,
Yeah.
Chandy.
So a trust structure, it helps you plan for succession and inheritance tax at one go. So succession in terms of who will control what, writing of the wishes, writing of how monies will be paid out to people who want to exit. What is the valuation if people want to exit? You can imagine a family which is held by multiple people, is unlisted, and a faction wants to exit for various reasons, amicably as well. How would they find the money to exit that party? And in trying to stop them, will you completely stop liquidity, or will it, if you allow them, will it mean competitors coming into your company? So a trust structure can be very articulate about this and can make it known to the next generation that if you want to exit, we will pay you at this price. It can be a multiple, it can be linked, and it will be paid out in 3, 4, 5 years. So you can have the philosophy of the group on exits written up. You can have philosophy written up on, if you want to exit 5% of your stake, how would you do it? If you want to exit your entire stake, how would you do it? Why I'm giving you this example is that the trust document can be written in great level of detail. It is what you wish. Your wishes can be captured in the trust document, and it has extreme flexibility. It also allows you, in a trust structure, what happens? A settler, the owner of assets, throws all the trust. So if you own shares in a company, you would settle the shares into a trust. The trust then holds the company. And then there are beneficiaries who are identified. All your next generation, etc., would be identified as beneficiaries, as percentage owners of those assets. Now, who's the owner of the shares? It is the trustee on behalf of the trust who owns the shares. So there's one owner. So there is no fragmented ownership. The control is still one. The economic benefits of the holding passes to the beneficiary, but the control, management, voting, everything stays in one place. It reduces challenges on succession, in that the trust document will already articulate who will be the next chairman, who will be the next CEO, and why. And all the whole family has agreed, right? There's a family charter. It would all come in. They would have a vote on how things are. So family charters would get into votes. How you can, the next generation, when nobody's around, nobody who crafted the trust deed is around, how to interpret the trust deed? What are the wishes of the trust deed? The trust also, a trust structure also helps you plan for inheritance tax. I know we don't have it today, and we don't know what the law will capture, but going by past precedents, what was there in the past law, you could potentially plan for some level of inheritance tax planning. It also articulates the overall vision. So, it's like the constitution, right? You have a constitution for the family on this is our purpose, and this is how you must carry it. And these are the kind of elections you need to have. And this is how you will be removed. This is how you will be paid. So everything can be captured here.
Okay.
And therefore the benefit of the trust. And, I'm just taking the point where Nikhil mentioned it's a tougher job to be a tax professional. I can tell you, I constantly tell patriarchs, this is one area where I can ask you the question and sit back. You'll take 10 days to, think of what that answer should be. It's usually the other way around, right? We are asked a question and we are squirming. Here it's the other way around. So, and I'll just anecdotally, it's slightly off the topic here, but with two families, there was one patriarch who said, this is exactly how I want to do it, and this is what I will do. There was another patriarch who set it up himself and had two children, and he said, I am going to pass this on equally. I don't want the trust. And if they can't get along with each other, it's their wealth. I'm gone. They want to destroy it, they'll destroy it. So there are two extreme views in this. There are some who feel that, it must continue, and rightfully so, for various reasons, societal X, Y, Z. But there are others who say, if my children at 40 can't behave themselves, then they don't deserve this. So, there are multiple views. So it gives protection. It also provides better management, right? By questioning and by laying down what you would want in the next generation, and how you would move on to professional managers, to giving children also. And I've seen grandfathers who are patriarchs set this up and say, when the grandchildren reach 25, they need to get this much income. It's not that they are beholden forever. They lose their drive, their intensity, and we have so much wealth in the family. Why shouldn't something go? There are others who say, if we give more than X, and the market cap is in multiples of that, but if we give more than X, these children will get spoiled. So you have to, as a person who sets this up, you have to ask the question, do you really want to do this? Do you want to give them 2 lakhs a month and say, more than this, you'll be spoiled? Yes, you may have set up the business, you may have come up the hard way, but the kids won't, it won't work. So the benefits are innumerable. The caution point is, a patriarch should not paint the next generation into a corner, in that every role should not be binary. It should not, it should not be that you will do A, B, C, and you can't do X, Y, Z. You must give flexibility to cater to the next generation, to the to the capabilities of the next generation, and so on and so forth. So I have seen wills, and I have seen this written up in multiple ways on that in-law should not come into the practice, or adopted children should not get anything. So you can have multiple ways, but I would say this is a very useful exercise. Even if you don't complete it, it just clears your mind of a lot of things. It also is, a caution point is, do not overdo it. Do not tighten it up to an extent where the others are stuck with an asset that they can't liquidate. You can't twist or turn. You should not be stuck in such a situation.
So I think the moral of the story, therefore, Chandy, is that it's case specific. You need to get your own thoughts as a, as the settler very clear, and then you need some guidance around, from starting from type of trust, what assets should go into the trust, what should not go, who should the trustees be, corporate trustee versus your own relatives. What is the lifetime of the trust, because and should it be the smallest child who is the beneficiary and therefore decide the lifetime. And I was going to ask you the question on your personal experience as well, which you answered very beautifully.
I
So,
think one point here should be, I would only guide is, it should not be, say if EY were to come in, it should not only be EY. You must get EY, HSBC lawyers.
yeah,
You must draw on the knowledge of multiple people, on the experiences. So this is something that you would do, and you would not, as such professionals as HSBC, as EY, we would not do for all the all the work to come to us. It is something that we have to craft, and it is advisable for the patriarch to talk to multiple people, gather at least among peers, right? When the entrepreneurs sit down, guys, what have you done? How have you thought of it? So get as much input as possible. This is not easy. This can lead to trouble sometimes. I have worked on, and I know we are running out of time, I worked on cases where the patriarchs have said multiple things, and at the end of it, we have only asked, can you please get your wife into the room, and can we have a conversation, and can you tell her what you're doing? And I tell you, after 1 year of work, that whole thing was scrapped. I said, what the hell is this? I will not accept all of this. So you have to get the buy-in of everyone. Otherwise, there's no point, right? Your patriarch can write something and go. You'll only be cursed later on. You need to get everyone's buy-in into succession, into joint ownership, into beneficial interest, and so on.
yeah, and it also could be the case where the husband comes in and says no. So just putting
No,
that.
absolutely. Either way, I'm just using, it's gender agnostic. It is just yeah.
Yeah, no, that was just on a lighter note, Chandy. So, Nikhil, a hard question for you. You talked about succession being very hard, and Chandy saying it's a complex one. So, I think when we also talk to a lot of our clients, and you do too, there's always this, different generations wanting to do different things. The first generation doing the traditional business, the others kind of saying, no way, one wants to play the guitar, or someone else wants to do something else. How have you dealt with it? Give us a practical or a live example if you have any.
So Surabhi, very, very pertinent. This is going to be I mean, I guess the simple answer is promoters have to trust their genes. If they've had the guts to start something of their own from scratch, there is no reason for them to doubt the next generation can't. So one, I think there has to be an acceptance that there could be varied interests. Two, a big reason for this is sometimes a lack of empowerment, because once the new generation comes in, they come in with a baggage, because parents typically, especially the ones who created the business, do have a me bias, in the sense that they feel that they have done it, and maybe their kids aren't equipped enough to sort of take it to the next level, etc., etc. So there is that element of huge oversight, which becomes a bit of a deterrent. And we've seen this in umpteen number of examples where, and especially in discussions where we've had it with the next generation, in private, they often say, oh, it's easier working in a different setup. It's just simply stated in so many words. So I guess it's quite natural, because the person who's created this has got that possessiveness about running the show his way. But I guess that becomes a bit of a deterrent. Two, also because I think just the way the opportunities are opening up, the exposure, etc. I think it has, and possibly the kind of education parents have given, it has opened Pandora's box in terms of opportunities. And sometimes they feel that the possibility of wealth creation and alternate ideas can be a lot more. I mean, a living example, if you have to deal with, is a large telecom company whose son has actually started his own different business, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, if at that level, on a high technology spectrum, you're getting into a business which is entirely different, I think these options are very much open. I mean, we know umpteen examples where kids have started a different business. So it could be for various reasons, but I guess uh, it should be very simple. Finally, like I used the phrase earlier, you can still run your existing business. You don't have to really force feed your next generation into it. You could definitely look at segregating the ownership structure to the management structure. A classic case is a large FMCG company where the promoters still continue to earn the huge dividends and earnings, etc. But the company is run completely professionally. Large listed FMCG company, and I mean this is something we've heard it from their own views that they're absolutely okay because their objective is let's run our business, our own interests separately, which is why you're segregating the ownership dividends to the running of the day-to-day of the operating company. So again, like I said, the situation, the circumstances will vary, and there is no reason for forcing somebody to getting into this business. You could still enjoy the fruits of this business just by segregating the ownership and the management structure.
And for all you know, the next gen does a better job
Much
than,
better. Yeah,
and that's something to be proud of. So yes, wonderful.
absolutely.
Yeah, and on that point, Surabhi, sorry to interrupt, but if you take, the e-com major that was sold for 20 odd billion dollars, you would see that people who are focused on the old business without stopping to take, to take some time to think of what else I can do, you missed an opportunity.
Yeah.
Perfect. Because I have lots and lots of questions for the both of you. A couple I've already asked, but we have about 7-8 minutes to go. So let me start shooting these as well. So Chandra has a question for you, Chandy. Would I attract capital gains tax if I transfer equity to a private family trust of which I am the settler?
Yeah. So there, the tax law, if you settle in the trust for the benefit of close family members, it is not deemed to be a transfer, and therefore you would not pay capital gains tax.
Okay, a question from Kshitij, and it is tax plus some, repatriation. So I think Chandy, I'll ask you to start off, and then Nikhil, you can chime in. How will proceeds be treated for resident Indians from tax perspective in India? I assume these are proceeds from capital gains, etc. Offshore trusts with Indian beneficiaries. So basically, I think Chandy, a question on offshore trusts with Indian beneficiaries and proceeds distributions, etc. on that.
Yeah. So again, that's complex law. So if you have an asset outside and is settled in trust, we are presuming that the wealth was created outside while the individual was outside and the business was outside. And once the income is distributed, there are two ways and one can plan that if you get it in the year after the income was earned, there is case law would say that it's a capital receipt and not taxable. I would say that that's an aggressive position. If you look at it, if you're going to get income, that would be, from the trust. A tax department would say that is your income, but there are provisions to say that it is not taxable. It's a capital receipt, and it's highly complex. So this answer must be taken as there are views that can be formed, and we would be happy to talk through the details on this.
Nikhil, anything you want to add from an offshore perspective or anything, that you'd like to add to this one?
No, not really, Surabhi, because tax is not really the banker's domain. So I will actually go by what Chandy said, and I'll stop it at that.
Okay, so Raman has a question, and Raman, maybe I'll ask you to add a little bit more to your question, but I'm going to try and read it out, and I hope that our panelists are able to answer this. Can designated successors afford a deal? Does the plan correctly account for the successor's financial capacity to acquire the company? Chandy and Nikhil, do you need more details to answer this question? I'm not very sure. I'm just reading it as it's posted. And maybe Raman, if you can just post the more specifics, I'll help the panelists answer your question better. This seems to be a complex question.
Yeah, I think here, Raman, the point, this is a complex question. If I got you right, you're saying how can the beneficiaries then take control of the asset or own the asset? I think it's very, very case specific, and it depends. If it's in a trust, it depends on how the trust deed has been written out. So again, this is a question possibly that we can talk. There isn't one answer. It would depend on the facts of the case. The beneficiaries are outlined. How do the beneficiaries take the money? How can they acquire assets from other members? From the trust. If that was the question, we can, I think it's better to talk, with HSBC and EY separately.
So Raman, we're very happy to set up a call with you, and we will request everyone at HSBC to share everyone's coordinates, and we can set up some time separately with you on this particular question. Last two questions. I know we're running out of time, but we have a lot of them. I'm just choosing them. Chandy, question for you: will versus charter. Somebody says you've used the words will, charter, etc. quite a bit. So what's the difference?
As in, a charter is a family constitution that would get captured in a trust. So it's a will versus a trust, really. The charter's principles and its philosophy is covered in the trust. So will facilitates movement of assets from generation to generation basis what you want, outside of the heirship rules. So that's what the will does. The will can be contested, it needs to be probated, so on and so forth. So if there's some things you want to do which is not, where you want to pass 80% on to one successor and 20 to the other, you can be sure that there will be squabbling at the end. Vis-a-vis a trust where you have everyone's buy-in and the asset is already moved, it is already controlled, and it is under a trust. You can have a registered trust deed as well. So therefore, the likelihood of disputes are much lesser, and it also facilitates the inheritance planning. A will would not facilitate an inheritance planning. Now, everyone who puts together a trust will also need a will, because you would keep some assets out that you would will down by a will, assets that are not in the trust.
Thank you so much, Annie. So I think, again, moral or the takeaway from here: if you don't have a will, if you haven't made the will, then you need to examine the law, the succession law that applies to you, and it depends upon religion and a lot of other factors, as one of our slides also presented. And it's something that you need to take into account or start doing, if not done. At the moment. So that's the important one. But all assets don't need to go into the trust, can be a combination, or maybe just a will do, depending upon your circumstances and your assets. So that's really what I think Chandy was also alluding to. Last question for you, Nikhil. And somebody has asked, what is HSBC's role in executing these transactions, or when a succession plan has to be done? What is HSBC's role? And I would also request you to talk a little bit about how HSBC and EY can work together, and why the combination.
Great. Thank you, Surabhi. So obviously, the tax expertise bit is not our domain as a banker. But I think very interestingly, our job starts after EY's job sort of gets finished as an advisor. So like Chandy's presentation actually referenced around multiple structures that one could look at, whether it was the holdco structure, the trust structure, the LLPs, etc. And we handle a whole host of others. Now, basis, if I have to make a sort of workflow chart on this, the obvious first circumstances is what the client discusses with the EY as a tax advisor, understands the circumstances, and a certain entity structure is agreed upon from a succession planning perspective. Once that is done, our role as a banker then comes in, where based on whether it's a holdco, LLP, or a trust, we're able to set up the accounts for the designated entity. We are then able to actually offer a full suite of products as long as they fit into the regulation for any of these entity structures. And we're able to execute the banking, the investments, the asset financing legs of these transactions. And if I were to actually Surabhi just step back a minute and just sort of give the audience a flavor of what is it that we can do in all of these, that should help the audience pool in their thoughts together and say, how do we then work together with EY and HSBC to collectively sort of execute what we've broadly spoken about. In our business, like you briefly mentioned, we look at the ultra high net worth clients for all their banking investments, complex investments, and asset financing requirements. These are met both on the banking side of the platform and the NBFC side of the platform. Uh, in terms of how do we define our role? We are actually just a custodian. We are actually a custodian of assets for you. So, but more importantly, we're also looking at preserving your immense faith in HSBC as a brand. In terms of some of the key differentiators that people should take away from this conversation, uh, there are a few principles that HSBC strongly works on, and our segment especially when we're dealing with ultra high net worth clients and large sums of money. I think for us, the first few principles are the TCF guidelines, which is the treating customers fairly. We take it in absolute letter and spirit, and our objective is very clear. Whatever risk or commercials we're talking about is very clearly understood and transparently conveyed. That sets up the tone for a long-term relationship. Secondly, our mantra of growth is growth through service excellence. So we've actually, as a bank, invested very heavily in a very robust service platform, and we actually maintain a 1:1 relationship management to service delivery ratio. That's simply to ensure that the outcomes that one expects are extremely customized and personalized. I think that's a similar approach we've been discussing throughout the presentation. Everybody's circumstances are very individualistic. Every case is individualistic. So there is no one size fits all. And I think that's the same philosophy we carry through in our dealings with clients at HSBC. From a vintage and continuity perspective, I think you'd see people in HSBC with minimum 15 to 20 years of longevity. So that speaks volumes about how we really cherish continuity in our relationships with clients. I just hope people don't get bored looking at the same faces on a lighter note. But having said that, I think we really prefer to invest in our people, invest in our clients more for the long run, and which is why we value our focus on trust, transparency, treatment of clients extremely passionately. Last but not the least, for us, collaboration is the key. Like we're collaborating with you, we also collaborate very extensively internally within our corporate bank colleagues. So we are able to offer integrated solutions for clients, both on the corporate side, which is their operating entity businesses, plus the promoter level holdco decisions like we've been speaking about. In addition to that, we also are a very well-networked bank globally. So whether it's about the Singapore corridors or the UAE corridors or the extremely active UK and US corridors, I think HSBC will be there in all of these to partner with clients. And we really understand the sensitivity involved around some of these very tricky conversations. And that's an element we really pride in. Confidentiality works extremely to the core of our decision making and every conversation that we have. So our business works on an extreme pillar of, in that sense, siloed information. The information which is relevant and non-essential gets conveyed. The rest of it is within the realms of confidentiality. So with that, I think I just wanted to give a very broad overview. But I think it's a platform which is very equipped to understand the sensitivities around varied needs for our ultra net worth clients. And that's it, really. Over to you, Surabhi.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. Both Chandy and I have been in EY way over 15 years. So I think we'll make a wonderful team, and we're not bored looking at all the faces around us. And I hope nobody gets bored of us either. But with that, I wanted to thank the both of you for being extremely, great panelists. We shot some very difficult questions to both of you, and I think both of you, at least, if I had lots of money, I would have done the succession plan. I still will, and I hope I earn lots of money. But yeah, thank you very much, and to all our audience, thank you for your questions. We have try to answer as many as we could. A few of those which were more complex, we'll be happy to get in touch with you as a team, both HSBC and EY together, so that you can get both your tax and wealth management questions answered together. We wish you have we hope you have a great Friday evening. The weekend is here, so it's perfect. We won't hold you for longer than this. But thank you very much to HSBC for organizing this. Thank you to everybody for participating. And Chandy and Nikhil, thank you again for being such a great panel and such a great set of presenters. Thank you very much. So to the backend team, we can sign off now.
Thank you, Surabhi.